because we had to tell our employees that we're going to start growing really, really, really fast in an uncomfortable way fast. So imagine a
Wow.
100-person company starting to recruit about 20 people a week into that group. So within less than a year, we grew to over 400 people. And that was painful, but it was really necessary. Overnight, we turned the company from an R&D company to a company that can do manufacturing, supply chain, have a full commercial entity, and all the other functions you need in a fully functional company. So we probably squeezed 3-4 years worth of growth into a 12 months period. That was painful, but it was also very gratifying to see.
Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Just sit back, relax, and learn from the leaders of today. It's a journey. Each one is different, unique, inspiring. Let's get started. This episode is powered by J Ventures, a community-driven VC fund in Silicon Valley in partnership with Leumitech, sponsored by Homeward Ventures, Hippo Insurance, Upwest Labs, Synergy Global, Hillel at Stanford, Leap, Birthright Excel, Serona Partners, and in media partnership with CTech. Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Today we're going to be talking to somebody who's literally changing lives of millions of people. Meet Adam de la Zerda, the CEO of Visby Medical, formerly Click Diagnostics, which he founded in 2012 to develop easy-use diagnostic tests. In March of 2020, the company pivoted from work on a sexual health test to tackle the coronavirus, and in July received FDA emergency authorization approval for its portable COVID-19 test. He is also an associate professor in the Departments of Structural Biology and Electrical Engineering at Stanford University School of Medicine, with research interests spanning a broad field of molecular imaging. His lab is developing new optical imaging tools with applications to cancer and ophthalmic diseases, such as age-related macular degeneration. Adam de la Zerda, welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. I'm so honored and excited to have you here. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
I've been following Visby Medical as a fan, as part of the J Ventures community, which is one of the investors in Visby Medical. And there are a few companies that I can truly, wake up and say, wow, I'm so excited to be part of the impact they're making. The work that you've been doing with Stanford from an academic level and then transitioning into Visby Medical as an entrepreneur and helping people, the way that they interface with the diagnostics of sexually transmitted diseases, and then pivoting and making another product that's relevant for COVID, and we'll talk about that now, but your grander vision of empowering people to take ownership of their diagnostics and knowing what's happening, I think is just remarkable. And so, Adam, take it away. Tell me a little bit about your own background and upbringing, and we'll transition into Visby.
So I'm a scientist by training, and I grew up in Israel. I'm a physicist, computer scientist, electrical engineer by training. I came to Stanford actually to do my PhD in electrical engineering. I'll be very honest, I did not realize that I will fall in love with the world of medicine the moment I landed at Stanford. And I have to admit also at the time, I didn't realize that engineers have something to contribute to the world of medicine. I actually started taking MCATs thinking I'm going to have to probably drop out of the PhD program and going to medical school. And it wasn't until I met a very special person who was the chairman of the Department of Radiology, Sam Gambier, who basically exposed me to the world of medicine in a way that I never quite realized before. I ended up staying in the Stanford community for a brief short period of time. I went to another university just across the bay, and then got back to Stanford as a assistant professor in the Department of Structural Biology in the medical school. But in academia, we focus very much on converting good ideas into papers. It very much felt to me that we really needed to take that one extra step and start a company that can make a physical product that will help people. And that's where Visby Medical really came to being. I started working with this VC firm in Palo Alto as an entrepreneur in residence. And through doing some work with them over a period of about 2 years or so, we created an investment hypothesis and then ended up starting a company that really was intended to solve that problem that we started with. And that was about 8 years ago. We're now a little over 400 people in the company, so we grew quite quickly. But it's been a lot of fun to actually see an idea you come up with turning into a physical product that actually helps somebody in the field. There's just incredibly gratifying feeling about that.
So to connect the dots, growing up in Israel, as an engineer, did you know that at some point you're going to be building your own company, and sort of your entrance into the medical world
was that something in between, but you always knew that it was going to connect somewhere, or how did it come about?
Actually, not at all. The reason why I went to Stanford is because Stanford has one of the best groups of quantum computers. And at the time, now 16 years ago, my mind was set on going into the world of quantum computers. I got to Stanford, and that's actually somewhat of a sad case where a good friend of mine just passed away from brain cancer. And for me, that changed what I wanted to do in life. It was very clear to me that if there's any way I can contribute somehow to the world of medicine, I really should. And by the way, that centralized theme was relevant then and is still relevant today. Many times in the world of medicine, we treat patients in the blind. When we make decisions on treatment, we don't really know what we're dealing with. We give drugs when we don't really know if they're going to be effective or not. Same for chemotherapy, same for infectious diseases. How many times did you go to the doctor, get some treatment, and the doctor called you a few days later saying, hey, the result just came back from the lab. Turns out they gave you the wrong treatment. Should have given you a different antibiotic, or I shouldn't have given you an antibiotic at all. You have a virus, not a bacterial infection.
Right. Now, so Visby Medical is starting with sexually transmitted diseases, right? And you're looking at the space of how do we help people and empower people to take ownership over this exact problem of the diagnosis.
Right.
Well, what is sort of the thesis that you came up with while an entrepreneur in residence that sort of led to this first product for Visby Medical?
So the first question we asked ourselves is, why is it that in the world of infections, and very uniquely in the world of infections, do we treat patients before we know what the diagnosis is? Because it's very unique to that area of medicine. Nowhere else in medicine is that acceptable, right? You will never see a physician telling a patient, look, I'm not sure if you have cancer or not. Let's give you some chemotherapy and see how it's doing, right? It's inconceivable to see that. Same thing for heart diseases. You're not going to open up a patient and do an open heart surgery unless you know for sure that patient has a heart disease. And yet for infections, that's exactly what we're doing. We treat them first, and only a few days later, the result comes back from the lab. And the reason for that is not because of lack of technology. There is a technology, and it works really well for diagnosing infections. It's called PCR. We've all been tested multiple times over this past year and a half or so for PCR for COVID, but PCR can test any infection in the body. You pick the sample from whatever area that hurts, you send it to the lab, they'll tell you what it is. The fundamental challenge is really that of patient accessibility. Is the technology accessible to anyone, anywhere, anytime? The answer today, at least, is no. Just take sexually transmitted infections, just a few basic infections like chlamydia, gonorrhea, trichomonas. In the United States, there are almost 50 million tests like this every year, and all of them are run in the centralized lab. Now, close your eyes for a moment and ask yourself, 5-10 years from now, will those 50 million tests will still be run in the lab? I can tell that my answer is I surely hope the answer is no.
Right.
Because if that's still the case, it'll be really bad. Do you know how many times the result that the lab is generating doesn't make it back to the patient? It's about 50% of the time. So we have all these tens of millions of tests being run every year with positive results that make it back to the doctor. The doctor tried to call back on the patient, but the patient is not picking up. The patient is long gone. Maybe the patient did not even give the right phone number. We have that all the time. And because of that, we have patients that are now suffering the long-term consequences of these STDs. Infertility, pelvic inflammation, the list goes on, ectopic pregnancy, life-threatening conditions because of an untreated STD. And it's not because lack of diagnosis, it's lack of patient access. When we actually needed to know what the result was, it wasn't available to us. So that was the insight. We said we have to solve that. Not about coming up with new technology, it's about creating and solving a patient access problem.
And I'll add on top of that, I'm sure that the consumer behavior, that there's a lot of friction to getting these tests. And I'm sure that there's countless cases, besides those 50 million tests that are being administered, I'm sure there's millions of cases of people that would like to get tested, but there's so much friction to go and get those tests and to wait those long hours and go through that complicated process that, by making it accessible, you're actually, we don't know, the question of recall and precision, we don't know what we're missing of the people that didn't get tested for this. And so I think it's fascinating. What happened, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago? COVID is breaking out. Stanford's campus is shutting down. I was evicted from campus overnight. Where are you at? Where's your head at? You're involved in the PCR space.
So in March of 2020, we just submitted the package to the FDA for our sexually transmitted infection test. We just finished the clinical trial. It took us over a year just to run the trial, and many years prior to that to develop the technology. And there we are in March of 2020 submitting a package to the FDA. And of course, as you can imagine, FDA had other priorities at that point in time. It was very clear for us that the fundamental technology we created for infectious diseases, for STDs and other types of infections, can also be relevant for COVID. And so we actually did an all-hands meeting. We were about 100 people in the company at the time. And we were very open with our employees and said, we're seriously thinking about joining the fight against COVID. We think it's the right thing to do. We think there's also potential real benefits for the company because it's an opportunity for us to showcase to the world what you can do by taking a big, large, sofa-sized $1 million instrument and miniaturize it to something the size of your phone. And then we said, if you can actually do that and you can apply that for COVID, what will that mean for the pandemic? Because it's very clear this is not going anywhere. So I'll just show you that was actually a pretty hard discussion because we had to tell our employees that we're going to start growing really, really, really fast in an uncomfortable way fast. So imagine a 100-person company starting to recruit about 20 people a week into that group. So within less than a year, we grew to over 400 people. And that was painful, but it was really necessary. Overnight, we turned the company from an R&D company to a company that can do manufacturing, supply chain, have a full commercial entity, and all the other functions you need in a fully functional company. So we probably squeezed 3-4 years worth of growth into a 12 months period. That was painful, but it was also very gratifying to see actual patients using, in this case, our COVID test. And in less than 6 months, we've gone from deciding we want to do a COVID test to pivoting and adapting our technology to build really the first single-use rapid PCR test ever created for COVID, to getting all the way through clinical trials, submitting to the FDA. And to the FDA's credit, they've been moving incredibly fast because they really prioritize COVID. So we were able by the fourth quarter of last year to already launch that really important product out to the market.
Unbelievable. What is that experience like for you as a CEO, as an entrepreneur, as an academic, as an engineer? You're onboarding 20 people a week to the company that you've built with your own hands. Yeah. I can only imagine how many hours of sleep you had this past year. What is that experience like for you on a personal level?
Well, it was definitely challenging times. Actually, we just had our third baby also in March of 2020. So a lot of things happened at the same time for us. And of course, managing that and managing the company and really making sure that the fundamentals of the company that we really love and cherish, which is primarily our culture, our values, can still flourish and get maintained there. And that's not an obvious thing. I mean, imagine if you left for a month just on a family leave or something and you're back, the company just doubled in size. And that's really, really dangerous if you're not being really intentional about what kind of atmosphere, what kind of people you bring. And no, we've made some mistakes, admittedly, along the way, but time was really of the essence. I have so many stories to tell you from, as you know, supply chain was so heavily disrupted over this past year. From a simple double-sided tape that we couldn't get on time that shut down our manufacturing line to how do we prevent our own employees from getting COVID? You see, I mean, our headquarters here, we're all getting tested for COVID all the time, but it's really challenging to do it in a way that can keep the manufacturing line safe, that allows you to continue to scale quickly, reinvent yourself. It's been a really interesting, challenging, thrilling, exciting year. I can say so many adjectives about this past year and a half.
Is there a sense of, mission or urgency? Because you're dealing in a state of uncertainty. Right now, we're seeing in the headlines of another surge in Europe. We have we as much as we want to speculate and draw statistical models, we really don't know where things are going to head and what variants are going to arise. And so you're building a company and you're doubling, pretty much over a month, and your employees are working on a product that is relevant yesterday. And, you have to get out of there. What is sort of the sense in the office like?
The sense of urgency and the sense of purpose was amazing. Not to say that before the pandemic it wasn't there. Obviously, the people here join the company not because that's an opportunity to make to increase their salary by a meaningful amount, right? Where I think we're obviously treating our employees very well, but there's another reason why people are here beyond just financial gains. It's really because they feel like they can make a meaningful impact on patients' lives, and they're really excited by that. But when the pandemic hit, that sense of purpose just increased so much because it got so close to home. It affected all of us. And we all felt, boy, if this product existed in large volumes, it would have meaningfully changed our lives. So we had our investors calling us, trying to help, obviously our board of directors. Everyone in the ecosystem around this company was helpful. The federal government stepped in a massive way and was incredibly helpful to us, not just financially, giving us many grants, tens of millions of dollars to accelerate our vision and push it forward as fast as we can. But in addition to that, even dedicating people in the federal government to help us get better chances with suppliers to make sure that we get the supplies that we need in order to produce those COVID tests. It was just an immense platform that took really the work of so many people, both within the company and outside the company, and every single one of them worked with an extreme sense of purpose. It was very heartening. It was very difficult, but very heartening year, I have to say.
Incredible. If I'm taking you a few years down the line, and we're seeing a world in which I can go to different pharmacies and I can purchase these different devices and empower myself, and everybody around me to take ownership of this knowledge and the diagnostics. Is there going to be consumer behavior that needs to be shifted, or any education for the market that you think we need to do? Or is this a trivial thing that people are just waiting for? And as soon as we have this device, people are going to feel comfortable using it. How do you see sort of the scale out of the product?
I think it's important for us to leverage as much as possible, at least, existing ecosystems that work well. And to the extent that we can help fill in important gaps, it's certainly a much easier path. So you don't go through an uphill battle here. Fundamentally changing consumer behavior is hard, but the pandemic showed that there is a way to change user behavior. So here are two examples. Take the telemedicine services. Mm-hmm. Telemedicine existed before the pandemic, but after the pandemic, immediately when the pandemic started, it increased by 50-fold, not 50%, 50-fold. And by the way, it's not coming down. It's staying high because people realized if I can speak to my doctor over the phone or over a video chat, I'd much rather do that than going to the actual clinic. That's one really meaningful ecosystem that developed almost overnight. Here's another one, last mile delivery services. Yeah. Also, the DoorDashes, the Ubers of the world, right? They existed before, but oh boy, last mile delivery system really stepped up to the task during the pandemic. So think about these two ecosystems and what you can now enable from a user journey point of view. If you just add to that a Visby device like this, you can actually bring the accuracy of a laboratory test to somebody's home. It means that as a patient, imagine that journey where you can allow somebody from the privacy and convenience of their own home to go to their telemedicine app and say, this is the symptoms I'm feeling. That is now generating the prescription, so your insurance will hopefully pay for that, so you only have to pay maybe a small copay. A DoorDasher comes knocking on your door, or somebody just giving you this device. You run the test, and within really minutes, you now know what you have. And then an hour later, prescription comes to your door and giving you the actual drug that you can now take. You can actually allow people to go from being worried about something, having symptoms, to a definitive diagnosis, to a pill going into their mouth. And that entire journey takes a couple of hours, and they never have to leave home for that instead of days or weeks. So I think that's a journey we're trying to enable. And to your question, I think the right way to get there is by leveraging the existing ecosystems that really grew up over the last year and a half so well.
Incredible. Academia, high tech, research, deep technology, software obviously is fundamentally changing the way that we live. The integration of software and hardware with what you're doing is changing the way that we interact with the world around us. Right. And obviously, some of the most interesting technologies are being developed in academia, like where you were at. And so, what needs to happen in your eyes in order to mitigate some of the dissonance or some of the tension that we might have today, so that we have, papers are great, but we also have these deep technology advancements actually coming into play in our daily lives and empowering, humanity to be propelled forward.
Of course. Many universities have already figured out how to enable really deep, meaningful partnerships between academia and industry. I think Stanford is really a wonderful example for that. In the medical school, so many times we're partnering with industry, but always maintaining a very, very high level of academic freedom. And that's really critical. So for example, when we launch this test now for sexually transmitted infections, the reason why we're able to launch that is because we ran proper clinical trials, which means that we actually went out to 15 different sites across the United States, and we asked them, those leading academical medical centers, to run that clinical trial for us in order to keep the academic freedom, in order to keep the transparency that you need in the clinical study. We really needed to have that really deep collaboration. And I think generally industry should be incredibly grateful for the fact that we have such leading academic centers around this country that can really partner with them like this. Same thing now also with software and the importance of AI also in the world of medicine. We're very much going to be relying on those kind of capabilities. And it's those nowadays, it's that student in a CS laboratory that's thinking, well, it'll be a really exciting project for me to work on now, that's doing things that in industry perhaps would be considered too high of a risk, maybe not worth exploring right now. That academic freedom that student has is something that's fundamentally important, and we never want to disrupt that academic freedom, but we certainly want to expose it more and more to industry so that we can make more and more meaningful ties.
Incredible. Adam, I want to thank you so much, not for just the episode, but for everything that you're doing, for the incredible impact that you're making, for the adaptability. I think it's so inspiring to think that you've been working on this company. I believe it was 6 years up to the point where COVID hit, right? And then overnight making this difficult decision. You know what? We're going to take what we've done and we're going to accelerate the growth now to be able to meet the needs of the world and find a win-win situation with the government, with humanity, with the company, and continue to lead strongly and still be so optimistic about it. And I can only imagine what that year must have been like for you. And as you know, as a future entrepreneur, I can only wish for myself to have the privilege of going through such an incredible and monumental experience as you've had. And I'm sure it's a story you'll be telling for many, many, many years. And so, Adam, thank you for everything. I can't wait to have these devices all around us and for humanity to enjoy the fruits of your work. And thank you for everything. Thank you for the inspiration.
That's very kind of you to say. Thank you so much for having me.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Thank you.